Hey guys, it's Alexis, aka The Soft Reader, and I'm here today to do my March wrap-up. I completed 6 books in the month of March, so overall not my best month this year so far, but the original TBR I posted at the beginning of the month had 7 books on it. TBR had The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, To All the Boys I Loved Before by Jenny Han, Wonder by R.J. Palacio, Before I Fall by Lauren Oliver, The Titan's Curse by Rick Riordan, 10 Things I Can See From Here, and then The Bone Witch by Ren Chapeko. And of those 7, I completed 6 of those, so I mean, I'm pretty proud of that. And then of my 2017 goals, I completed every one of the monthly ones as well. So I consider myself to be doing pretty good so far this year in terms of getting everything I want read. I'm going to do my wrap-ups a little bit differently this month. Usually I just do them in the order I read things, but I kind of like how a lot of booktubers do it by they start with their least favorite book and then go up to their most favorite book of the month. I kind of like that. I like that it builds anticipation and up into the best book you read the month. So this month, most of the books I read were really good. I think I only gave a low rating to one book, and that was a 2-star, and I'm pretty sure everything else was 4, 4.5, 5 stars. So go ahead and just get into it. My least favorite book that I read this month was 10 Things I Can See From Here by Carrie Mack. This is basically about our young main character named Maeve who goes to live with her dad in Canada for 6 months while her mom is in Haiti. And it's basically about her having really terrible anxiety and dealing with her father who's an alcoholic, and this girl who she's kind of meeting and falling for. So it does feature a female-female romance. I got an arc of this on NetGalley, and I thought I was going to love it. There were so many reasons I should have loved it, and I just didn't. I really didn't connect with Maeve. I didn't like her. I really didn't care about any of the characters. The love interest for me felt very cookie cutter. I don't feel like she really had personality. Their romance is super insta-lovey, so I didn't really like that. And then I appreciate that their romance wasn't about trying to cure Maeve of her mental illness. I appreciated that, but I just wasn't buying into it. The other 2 problems I really had were that Maeve is constantly sharing death statistics and statistics about natural disasters, and so she's constantly this many people die in car accidents every year in Canada, this many people worldwide, and it's like that for the entirety of the book. Now, I'm somebody who has anxiety, and a lot of times my anxiety will show itself in that paranoid way. More so when I was a kid than I am now, but reading this book made me so anxious. It made me constantly thinking about death. And I don't want to be doing that. Given my history with anxiety and depression, that's not the headspace I want to be in. And so for me, this book was not enjoyable to read. I just couldn't get past that. That just kept nagging at me the whole time I was reading, because she kept bringing it up, and I just wanted her to stop talking, honestly. I was like, can I read about somebody else? And then the other one is that there were some really detailed chapters regarding some certain topics I wish weren't in the book. There's a couple of chapters where she talks about seeing her baby siblings be born, and she goes into fairly graphic detail, more detail than I wanted to read, so I didn't enjoy those chapters, and there might have only been 3 or 4 of them, but I still was just And then there's a whole chapter where she describes the genitalia she saw of her mom's boyfriend that I didn't want to read about. I was just okay, no thank you. And so just little stuff here and there, it was some of this content I just wished wasn't in the book. And then lastly, the thing that kind of irked me is that the main character's stepmother, Claire, the only character I liked at all, made a comment that she identified as being bisexual and that she had dated a girl back in college. And basically, the main character is just well, that doesn't make you queer. And it's the mom literally said, you can call me bisexual. Like, she was like, that's my identity. And then the main character was like, well, being queer is about not being into someone of the same sex. And that's just total bi erasure. And I was like, okay, Maeve, I was like, you know what? I don't care about you as a main character from that point on. And just the fact that, like, she totally shut down her mother, for her stepmother, for being bisexual. Like, bisexuals already aren't treated like they're part of the LGBT community as it is, and so it was like, I was like, nope. The next 3 books I'm going to mention are all 4 stars, so we're just going to go ahead and get into it. The first is The Titan's Curse, which is the 3rd book in the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series by Rick Riordan. And I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I've been really enjoying the Percy Jackson books. They're a lot of fun for me. The only reason I don't give them 5 stars is because I feel like every book is the same thing. I feel like every book is following the same formula where we're going on a journey to do something. And that is literally every book. And, like, I get that that's meant to be an homage to Greek mythology, because everybody was always going on quests in Greek mythology, but it's just that, like, because I'm reading them in sequential order, it's kind of like, I'm like, okay, we're doing the same thing again in this book. But I really enjoyed The Titan's Curse. I liked a lot of the new characters we got to meet in this book. I liked the D'Angelos, Artemis. I liked that Toya was like an actual character in this book. I loved Apollo. I love Apollo so much. He's such... I don't want to say fuckboy, but he is. And that was hilarious to me. Like, reading the Apollo character, who's so douchey. It was just so much fun for me. Every time he was on screen, I was cracking up. I was laughing so hard. Oops, I forgot to hold this up too, but yeah. The Titan's Curse, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I'm going to mention, I loaned out from the library, so I don't have it anymore, and that is Wonder by R.J. Palacio. I really enjoyed this. Again, I couldn't give it a full 5 stars just because I do feel like this is actually the first book I think I've ever read where I felt like my age impacted the reading, just because, like, the characters don't feel like 10-year-olds, but they are, and I couldn't connect with, like, that aspect. Like, I don't know, it's just that, like, a lot of the behavior and stuff, I was just like, oh yeah, they're 10, and I just, like, that really, there was, like, a mental block in my head that just prevented me from being able to connect to the story and to the characters. And that's the first time that's ever happened to me. Usually that's never a problem. Like, reading the Percy Jackson books, it's not an issue that Percy's, 14 and I'm 22. But in this book, I had such a hard time connecting to the characters and the story, because it was about someone so young. Which, I mean, I feel like most people, that's probably why they're drawn to the story, you know, and especially, like, I don't have kids, so it's like, that was, like, you know, I didn't have that, like, emotional maternal heartstring pulling, which I feel like I do think happens a lot with moms who read this book, which is fine. I mean, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, I'm just saying that's something that I don't have. But it was still a really good book. I really liked the way it was written. It's told from Augie's point of view, who is the young man who has the facial abnormality, who's going to school for the first time, but it also follows some of his friends and his sister, and her sister's friends, and so I really liked the way it was written. I really liked getting the other character perspectives, especially some of the characters where it's an interesting perspective to look at. And so for that reason, I did give it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I'm going to mention is the other arc I read in the month of March, and that was The Bone Witch by Ren Pecco. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I know a lot of reviews on Goodreads rated this very lowly, but I loved this book so much. I really loved the world. The world felt so vast, and the history was so present and overwhelming at times, but I really liked that. I loved the way it was written. This tells the main story of our character named Taya, who is basically a bone witch, so she's basically a necromancer, and it's about her, it's told in 2 points of view. The first is her discovering she's a bone witch and training to become an Asha, who is just like a certified witch. And so it's like her training to be an Asha, and then it's told, I believe, 2 years later after the end of the book, where we're following now a young man from another country named Bard who has come across Taya in exile. So she has been exiled for something we don't know about, and she basically is like, I don't want to spoil it, but it's basically about him meeting her, and she's giving insight into her life that we're reading as readers in the other half of the book, in the other chapters, and they alternate, and I love that. I love books typically when they play with non-linear storytelling in that way. I also really liked that there's really not a romance in this book. Basically, our main character, Taya, has a crush on another character for the majority of the book, and they have a few scenes together where she's like, he's so dreamy, but there's really no romance in this book at all. I mean, there's no, like, secret meetings or any of that stuff, so I liked that a lot. I feel like that's a breath of fresh air, that we're not overwhelmed with romance, you know, right off the bat. The writing I really, really liked. It's very, very descriptive heavy, so be warned, it's full of descriptions, and a lot of it is about clothing. A lot of the descriptions are about clothing and hair, but that's kind of a big part of this culture, so I think that's why it's done that way. The 2 stars I took off is because the first is that really for 75% of the novel, nothing really happens. And even though I still liked that, I still loved learning about the different culture and the history and the life of an Asha and stuff, I still enjoyed that. A lot of people won't. There's little action in this book. It's kind of a lot of Taya just going to lessons and learning stuff, and her describing beautiful dresses. So there really isn't a lot happening, and I think a lot of people are going to find this book boring. The reason I took off half a star is because this book is so similar to Memoirs of a Geisha by Arthur Golden. Like, so much of what happens in this book, if you've read Memoirs of a Geisha, you're going to get, like, whiplash or, like, flashbacks to Memoirs of a Geisha because it's very similar. Taya goes through her Asha training is basically the exact same geisha training that the main character in Memoirs of a Geisha goes through. You know, the dressings are very specific, and the author talks a lot about that. She goes to music lessons, dancing lessons, tea ceremony lessons, history lessons, all things that the characters in Memoirs of a Geisha do. Some of the scenes in The Bone Witch are almost exact replicas, I would argue, of scenes in Memoirs of a Geisha. Not exact replicas, but they're very similar. There's a scene where Taya gets lured to one of the tea houses where the Asha entertain guests, like geisha, and she's tricked into going there, and that is, if you've read Memoirs of a Geisha, you already know the scene I'm talking about in Memoirs of a Geisha, where a very similar thing happens. So yeah, so I couldn't give it a full out of 5 stars because, one, I think a lot of people will find it very boring, and there were even times in the beginning half of the book where I was just like, okay, can we get to something, please? But mostly it's very similar to Memoirs of a Geisha. It's basically Memoirs of a Geisha, but with magic. And so for that reason, yeah, I couldn't give it a full out of 5 stars, but even at 4 out of 5 stars, I loved this book. I thought it was great. The next book I read this month was my second favorite book of the month, and that was To All the Boys I Loved Before by Jenny Han. Guys, I never thought I would be here telling you guys that I gave this book a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Not that I don't love contemporary, I do, but just so many people have told me that this book is just light, it's fluffy, and that a lot of people don't like the main character, Laura Jean. Guys, alright. First of all, this is basically about our main character, Laura Jean, who writes letters to all of the boys that she's had feelings for. She's written 5 total. So she writes them, gets all of her feelings out, and then she puts them away in a hat box in her closet, and she moves on. She's no longer caught up on the boy that she likes. One day, all of her letters get sent out. So the 5 that she wrote all get sent to the boys that she's written them about. And so it's basically about Laura Jean confronting the different boys and the interaction she has with them after they've received her letters. And so along the way some other stuff happens. One of my guilty pleasure tropes was in this book, which is the fake boyfriend trope. And I don't know if that constitutes as a spoiler, but if you guys love the fake boyfriend trope, it's in here. And I'm such a that's such a guilty pleasure of mine, is the fake boyfriend trope. I love it so much. So that was in this book. So, I mean, pretty much once that happened, I was just like, yes. I also listened to this on audiobook. The audiobook was read by Laura Knight Keating, who did an amazing job. Like, I don't even know if I necessarily would have loved this book so much if I hadn't listened to it on audio, but I love Laura Knight Keating's narration so much. She does a different voice for every character, and like, they're very distinct. Like, when she does her voice for Laura Jean, or for Kitty, or for Josh, or Peter, you know who's talking without her being like, said Peter, because she does such a distinct different voice for each of them. So I loved that. That was fantastic. That made my enjoyment spike a lot. I loved pretty much every character in here, even like the mean girl character. I still really I was still so interested in her. Kitty, the younger sibling in this family, is savage. Kitty is a mess. I love her. Every time she opens her mouth, I just want to pet her 10-year-old head because she is hilarious. I love how important family is in this book. A huge chunk of the book is Laura Jean talking about the relationship she has with her sisters and her father and her mom, who's deceased. Laura Jean is Korean American. Her mother is from a Korean family, and then her father is white. But the Korean aspect takes such an important part in their life. She talks about how her dad tries his best to make Korean food because of their mother having passed away, that he wants them to still be like very, very connected to their Korean side. She talks about the things about Korean culture she's learned from her mother's side of the family. So I liked that. I liked that Korean culture was so prevalent in this book, which luckily enough I have already read the sequel, which I read in April. I've already read in April, and it still carries on in the series, and I absolutely love that. The romance in this book, for me, I adored. I ate it up. It was so cute. And, you know, basically, you know, and a lot of people don't like Laura Jean because they say she's innocent or she's naive. For me personally, Laura Jean was like an amalgamation of all of my friends in high school. Like, if you had taken little bits and pieces of my different friends that I had in high school and fused them into one person and made them half Korean, it probably would have been Laura Jean. So for me, I really liked Laura Jean. I thought Laura Jean was funny. I thought she was sassy. I think that she definitely came with her flaws, but I really, really liked her. I liked reading from her perspective. I loved hearing the little quips and the little jokes she made. Those constantly were making me crack up. And yeah, I loved this book, and I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. It's so good, and I'm so excited for the third one, guys. I'm so excited. Final book I'm gonna mention in this wrap up, and my favorite book of the month, the book that I gave 5 out of 5 stars to. I thought it was perfect. I think it's going to be a lot of people's favorite reads of the next coming month, and that is The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. This follows our main character, Star, who is kind of living this dual life, one in the poor black neighborhood she lives in, and then kind of this other one where she goes to a mostly white, like, prep school. And so she's kind of like dealing with being two different people in those two different environments. So one day she's back in Garden Heights, which is the neighborhood she's from, and she goes to a party, and after the party her friend Khalil and her are driving home, and Khalil gets pulled over for having a broken taillight, and the officer who pulls him over, who is white, actually ends up shooting and killing Khalil. And so it's basically about Star being the star witness in this investigation. And so it's about her dealing with losing her childhood friend Khalil while also dealing with the pressure that comes with being the witness, and just dealing with the overall aftermath of the shooting. This is inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement. It's very, very topical if you live in the United States or just worldwide. I loved this book. I mean, there's a friend of mine at work that I think I'm going to loan her my copy because I want her to read it so bad. But it's so good. I laughed. I cried. I got angry. There were parts where I was so frustrated with what was happening in the story. Stuff that I even predicted was going to happen still made me so upset. reading it that I had to stop reading, which of course, me being white, is like a totally different experience than I think someone of color would have reading this book. I mean, I can only imagine if I got angry, how angry probably someone who could relate better to the story would feel. There's so many little nuances in this book that I think are great. You know, she's dating a white guy, so there's a pretty decent bit in there about her being with a white guy. There's this bit in here about friendship where Star realizes that a friend that she had, is kind of toxic, so she's kind of in this toxic friendship. I loved that. I loved that storyline so much because I've had friends that I've considered throughout my life to be toxic, so like watching Star go through this was like a mirror back into my own experiences, and I loved that. I loved that part of the story so much. One of the things I was hoping when I picked this book up, I was hoping that this book was going to, you know, enlighten me as a white person, obviously, about, you know, like, I'm aware that as a white person I am privileged. I am in a system that systematically favors me. I understand that. But I was hoping this book was going to push that even further for me, was going to really confront me with that privilege, and it did. I appreciated that so much. Just so many of the topics that this book handles are done very well. Star is such a great main character. She's the main character you really want to root for. You really feel the pain that she feels. I loved a lot of the other characters. Star's parents were actually my favorite characters. I loved her parents. I loved their interactions. I loved their both very prevalent relationship with Star, and how present they were in her life and in the life of her brothers, and I loved that. I just think that this book has everything to offer, and it was so amazing. 5 out of 5 stars. Please go read it. It was wonderful. Alright guys, so that was my March wrap up. I'm sure this video is going to be kind of long because I know I was just kind of rambling about all the books I read because, like I said, I had a mostly fantastic reading month. I liked mostly everything I read, which was awesome. I'm pretty nervous about how the next couple of months are going to go just because I am moving, so I'm going to be packing all of my life up. But again, I have a video I'm going to film about that pretty soon coming up. You guys should let me know down below what was your favorite read of March, and I'll see you guys soon.